Hi everyone, welcome. What you see here is an illustration similar to the illustration I usually prepare for this system over here. The system that you see in this tray right below the illustration is a tub of ENCs. They're European night crawlers. They've been in this tub now for 62 days. And when I started into the feeding of this bin, it wasn't until a week in. So this system was built with bedding only, at which point I populated it with worms, and they lived in here for 7 days without receiving any foods of any sorts. And then I started into the feeding of the system. And there's been 1, 2, 3, 4 going around, and then another lap starting here, 5, 6. The sixth feeding, which was now 10 days ago, was peppers. And today they're getting their seventh feeding in this corner, in this continued clockwise rotation. But going back now, when we get back into this corner here, which I've labeled using this coffee filter, indicating to me that that's where I last fed, the peppers, I'm curious to see how the peppers have come along over the past 10 days. And then we'd kind of gotten into the pattern of going 10 days between feedings. So 10 days prior to that, 20 days ago, there were avocados on the fifth feeding. 10 days prior to that, 30 days ago, they got apple peels. Those apple peels were getting pretty worked last time we checked in here to put the peppers in. And even at that point, after only 10 days, the avocados were seeing a good amount of wear already. Going back, though, we're getting into stuff that there's hardly any remnants of. Of course, there was also this big stem of a pumpkin, which we're definitely going to see some leftovers of. Mashed potatoes at this point, I don't think we even saw that many, if any, last time. But I'm going to get in here with today's feeding, which is going to consist of cantaloupe melon rinds and some coffee. And I've got bedding and grit. We'll include those as well as part of the feeding. All my bins somehow have slowed down a lot, so I've actually checked in on a number of bins on their 10th day after the last feeding, just like we're doing here. And in most cases, at least on the past few check-ins, I've noted that the system didn't even need another feeding. There was plenty of leftovers. But in this system, it somehow seems like we can fit a good amount of food, perhaps more than we see in other systems. And even that corner where we're putting the food today over here, here we've noticed for the past couple feedings already that there's pretty much no leftovers of the veggies and carrots that had been put in there. And at this point, that was quite a while ago too. So we're feeding a corner that's not seen much action in quite some time because they polished off what was put in there quite fast. And it's been kind of void of any fresh food since then. I always try to, oh, look at that. Got a couple worms over here on, on the paper. You could see how they're kind of connected to one another and they're mating. I was just noticing how bright pink that one of them was. And, well, you know, I feel bad interfering with that activity. I wonder if we could just sort of fold this in a way that we just keep them sheltered and they feel like they've got their privacy back and they could continue with what they were doing there. And here was where we put the peppers. And the peppers, I don't know, peppers are something I typically avoid in my worm bins for some reason. Mainly because I usually eat the majority of it and the only thing remaining is almost seeds only. And I'm not a big fan of seeing stuff sprout out in my systems, but pepper seeds are, you know, slow to germinate. At least that's my experience from when I start seeds at home to be planted in the garden. They do take a while. They're finicky. They want warmth before they'll sprout. So perhaps the peppers are going to just get composted and not start trying to grow. Not that that's a big deal either. If you get sprouts in your worm bin, you just pluck them and reintroduce them as food. I definitely see leftovers of the peppers. These peppers were peppers that grew in my garden. There were some jalapeno. These darker ones are the jalapeno. And these lighter ones are a Hungarian variety. I got the package of seeds from somebody that travels back and forth between here and Hungary often. It's a stewardess who bought some seeds for the garden last season. I have to see if I can get some more for this season. And then the other thing that's in here from not 10 days ago, but more like, I don't know, at this point, maybe 48 days ago. I only remember because in the last video, 10 days ago, I think we calculated that this was 38 days in the making as far as its progress and breakdown. And it's so cool how so many worms really kind of tuck themselves into the folds of this stem's shape, kind of. And I don't know why. It's just interesting to see how they get in there. Ooh. So this stuff is, you know, breaking down. It's softening up big time. I usually don't try to help the materials too much in their breakdown. I'd rather see what the worms can accomplish. But it is tempting sometimes to take a piece of material that you could never imagine breaking apart with 2 fingers and just chipping away at it, you know, like when you see an avocado pit broken down to the point where you can just crush it, or maybe like one of those mango seed husks, which is so tough that you would never imagine that you'd be able to break it apart. You could just tear it. So we're going to keep putting these things that are here from previous feedings right back where we found them, because we want to be able to check in on them again in the future. So yeah, 48 days on that stem, 10 days on the peppers, and it'll be a while before we get back to this corner, so we'll be able to continue to check in on the progress there, right? So going back at this point to where the avocados were, the avocados really got popular quick. So like within just the time between the feeding of the avocados occurred and our next check-in, which was to add these peppers over here, we found that the worms had really taken a shine to one of them. It was the one that's closer to the camera. This one here had been pretty much surrounded by worms already. It was, yeah, that's what we saw last time too, that some had kind of made their way in. We're starting to feast on the inside of the avocado, but a good number of them are actually right beneath it, sort of picking up all the juices that are spewing out of these things, I guess. This one didn't have a lot of action, but now it has changed and is just as occupied as the one that was getting pretty popular. I kind of like keeping these things closed. I don't know why. It just seems like observing their progress without allowing the worms to just get at it, like they got to work to get at it in a way. Seems interesting to me for some reason. I don't know why. And this is like some of the bedding that's in here that was placed around the food to give the worms some medium to travel through to get at the yummy foods. This was like a banana, stem of a banana. The worm is down inside of it. I think there was a couple other little things that I might have noticed were food items as I was excavating here, but I don't think any of them would be the mashed potato at this point. We were seeing mashed potato leftovers for some time. The presumption was that the reason it was taking so long was maybe because it was seasoned with salt, which salt is something the worms definitely don't like. So now back to the apple peels, you know. 30 days, pretty much a month for the apple peels. Last time we were in here, we saw a good amount of worms, and I suspected that it could have had a lot to do with the fact that those apple peels still had a good amount of moisture trapped in them. And what you see here is, you know, remnants of the apple peels all over the place. Just these thin little bits of material. Actually, you know what? I was mistaken. This is a banana peel. There are little bits of banana peel in a lot of my feedings. I thought I was a little bit more pure when it came to what I was adding to these feeding areas, but I guess I was kind of mixing things up, like I'm doing today too, you know. I had some coffee that I had to get done away with. I had some cantaloupe. So they're getting all that stuff, but you know, even though there's only little bits and pieces of these apple peels left, it feels to me like there still might be a little bit of material on some of them that can get nibbled off. So I'm going to attempt to get all those scraps of apple peel back down where we found them, maybe even those banana peels too. Just get all the food that came out of that corner back down into that corner so we can continue there uninterrupted. So we're, you know, obviously not allowing it to continue uninterrupted. We're interrupting it quite a bit by digging it out and checking it out. But basically we're at the finish line. We're back at this corner, which at this point, even during the last few check-ins, we'd already noticed that there was really no signs whatsoever of any carrots or small veggie bits that had been placed in here so long ago. And that's completely understandable, especially if it's something like carrots. That's one of their favorites, that's for sure. So I'm just going to open up enough space into this corner where we're going to add feeding number 7 now. And number 7 is going to get filled in with cantaloupe and coffee. And I guess it does seem like we could continue on this pattern, you know. By the next time we roll another 10 days from now or so into that corner where the apple peels had been placed, there's not going to be a whole lot left there, so there'll be kind of a void, a vacuum developing where we can certainly add more food and keep this going. I think the worms seem to like it. I don't know. They really seem content. All the corners seem pretty well occupied with a bunch of worms. Even this one here that's been devoid of any fresh food for some time now. So, you know what? Something I do sometimes, which is bring back an older, more seasoned coffee filter like the one that we've been using to mark the corners that we last fed with. So when we get done here, we like to put a coffee filter over the feeding, but I've got a nice fresh one that we're going to be able to use here. So we'll incorporate this as bedding into the feeding area. I've also got my pre-made collection of dampened, shredded cardboard paper, some leaves in there. We'll mix up a nice little batch of material that this feeding can get mixed in with. To me, it seems like just putting in an entire mass of coffee like this would just end up sitting there for a long time. So I've been attempting to try things to see if I can help this stuff break down a little bit more quickly. So like here you can see me mixing it in with some of the bedding materials. This is going to become bedding. It'll be kind of like a little catch, I guess, at this point, which is kind of cool. Any juices coming off of this cantaloupe melon rind will have some place to soak into. All that paper shreds on the bottom, that coffee filter. This piece of paper will become really popular for the worms to come hang out on. So this stuff is kind of frozen together. Some pieces have on them a little bit more of the meaty part of the melon than others. Other ones have virtually nothing on them. And the worms will eat it all. It's just funny how they leave behind some of this tougher woody kind of material for last. It eventually breaks down too, but they nibble out all the orange colored fleshy part of the fruit first, and then they come back and they polish off the tougher material at the end. I'm sorry about that. I usually mute my phone before I start filming, but we're almost done here. What I just added there is a little bit of crushed eggshell, which is my preferred grit. Other people use crushed crustacean shells, crushed rock dust. There's all kinds of stuff, sand. There's all kinds of stuff they could use as grit in your worm bins, and some people just don't use any, you know. The worms seem to get by there too. So we're just going to drop in the last of what's been allocated for this feeding, and it's a pretty generous feeding, especially since in a lot of my bins I've just been pulling away, and after a 10-day interval like this one has seen, just deciding not to feed because of the abundance of leftovers. And, well, you know, the last feeding being peppers with some leftovers remaining is fine, you know, because it's got its own corner to continue getting worked down in, and the worms will continue working it. But it is kind of cool, you know, you got to admit, being able to come into a bin like this and see how certain food types progress over time. Oh, jeez. This little guy got caught in the line of fire when I was applying the grit. He's got like a nice little grit covering now. Alright, well, he certainly has no shortage of grit, so he'll be good as far as feeding is concerned. Let's break open this coffee filter Coffee filter is what I use to indicate where we last fed, so I'm resting it right on top of the section where we just added today's little portion of cantaloupe and coffee, along with some grit and bedding. And it does seem like we've got a good amount of space remaining in this system to keep at this pocket feeding for a while longer. You know, we're only at day 62, and most of my bins go, who knows, maybe even twice this age before they start getting geared up for harvest and migration of the worms. And, well, you know, after 7 feedings, there too, we're probably about halfway through. Most of my bins can usually take about 15 or so feedings before I start to feel like I've worked my way out of having enough room to work. So what do we got going on here? Which ones were the worms that were mating? They must have concluded the deed and went about their merry way. So hopefully we'll see some cocoons. I don't know, do both lay a cocoon at that point, or both of them on the way to generating a cocoon, or just one of them? Shows how much I know about worm biology. Gotta say, this piece of plastic's been doing a terrific job keeping things nice and damp in here. I was prepared to add moisture if I felt that it would be necessary, but it was certainly not necessary here. So all we're doing is covering back up and letting things continue just the way we found them, with the exception of the new feeding. And that'll probably go in another 10 days. Now, we've been pretty good about keeping to the 10-day interval between the feedings in the system. And the next time we would feed, today it was, can I write upside down? Is that an A? No, I think it's not. It looks more like a, oh, backwards. Definitely not an upside down writer. Cantaloupe and coffee. Alright, so when we get around to feeding number 8 next time, which will go right there, we will have completed 2 laps around this system. And there's certainly no reason to stop there. We'll probably continue. Alright everyone, that's it for today's video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please remember to leave me a quick thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching.